Hey, I'm Jonathan McReynolds, and a lot of you know me as a songwriter, as a recording artist, as somebody who makes these 3 to 6 minute clips of music, and then I put them all together, and we call that a body of work. We call that a project or an album. You know that each album kind of has an overarching theme, but also each song has its own grain of inspiration, its own bit of revelation, its own seed, its own origin. And so, in this season where I've, kind of flexed a little bit of my author muscles, I kind of approach things in a similar way. There is a chronological order to this thing. There is a mountain to valley to mountain to valley in this book, but also each chapter has its own place where I was at, its own stories. Like I sometimes thinking about just where I was when I was writing that, I can kind of get a certain mental picture of the beauty or the gloom or the dread or the joy that accompanied me during that chapter while I was writing that chapter. And so I just wanted to kind of share some of those individual stories with you. So as I look, at the book, and this is kind of the first pass, making sure everything is completely right before you guys get it. I start off with what I call the opener. First of all, pun intended, it is the opening, chapter, the opening section to this book, but also I was literally telling a story where I found myself really high on this mountain, hard in the grind, burning out, losing joy for this, losing peace in this, as I was on this tour, a very large tour, big tour. Actually, I believe, at least at that point, and maybe still, it was the largest tour in history in my genre. The biggest tour in history. As far as dates, as far as how many butts were in the seats, this was the biggest, and I was smack dab in the middle of it. I did have an interesting position though. I wasn't the focal point, I was the opener. And that comes with its own level of, isms. It has its own nuances, its own idiosyncrasies that just come with it. I mean, there's you're important, but not that important. You're irreplaceable, but kind of replaceable. Everybody knows you're gonna be there, but nobody really knows you're gonna be there. Nobody cares you're gonna be there. There's some people that absolutely come mostly to see you, but the lion's share of people are absolutely gonna stay to see the big shots, the major act. And so it was a very interesting time where both in solitude, just being kind of in the tour bus in my RV alone, but also being thrust back out in front of the public and having to, kind of swallow whatever, the pride, whatever the fear, the nerves, whatever it is. All of that really did kind of bring to bear this opportunity to evaluate, what are you doing? I mean, there's a level of pressure that comes with being on any tour, being any performer. But I think that this kind of rare case that I wasn't the main act, it gave me a lot of time to just be like, how do I feel? What is going on? Like what am I even working toward? I think that in an earlier prayer call we had today, we talked about the joy that was set before Christ. He endured the cross, and he did all of these things. He was like he endured the shame, he endured all of this craziness, but it was because he saw this joy set before him. But at this moment, I ain't see nothing. I was just going from day to day. And that's a tough existence when you're just climbing and climbing, and you don't even know what you're climbing to, what you're climbing for. So the first official chapter is, how did you get so high anyway? And so in this chapter, I kind of rewind back. So remember, I'm kind of on this historically big tour, really cool, amazing experiences. You can look at my Instagram and go back a few years and you can see just kind of the amazing shots of this tour. But I kind of have to think, how did I get here? Like, like you see this happen as like one of those freeze frames, like, I guess you're wondering how I got here. Well, this is what happened. And you know what gets revealed in the story, and I can't wait for you guys to read it, is really the humble, beautiful, God-filled start to my journey. I mean, there's just no question. I mean, I wasn't even looking for it that hard. I wasn't pursuing it that hard. I was kind of preparing for something in the vicinity, but what it turned out to be, I had no clue. I just really had no clue. And God was just doing things, just divinely, just setting things up, putting you in the right rooms. I'm sure that you can imagine those moments, especially at the beginning, where God just kept kind of putting you in the right places. And you weren't even thinking like that, but here it is. And I think for me, it's really hard sometimes to reconcile how something so clearly God started has become so difficult and draining and heavy. Like, didn't you say that your burden is light? So this is not making sense. If you started this, why is it so heavy? If you're the one that told me to do this and you made all of the ways for me to do this, why is it so heavy? Well, perhaps it's because there's a part of this that God isn't in, that God didn't originate. Yeah, maybe he started it. Maybe he gave you the idea. Maybe he told you to do this. Maybe he started, the runway for you to take off. But some of the distance that we're flying, perhaps he didn't ask us to do some of that. Some of the heights that we're climbing, some of the ways that we're trying to avoid mediocrity and be above reproach and aim for that award and that accolade and get that amount of money and those amount of followers, perhaps that has nothing to do with him. And the mountain that he started is no longer the same one you're climbing, or the heights that he had for you and the strength that he had for you to get up there. You vacated that. I know that I vacated that. And now I was operating on my own strength, for my own ambitions, at my own heights, looking for God to meet me up there in a place he probably never really intended for me to be, at least not the way I had gotten there. Be honest about the mountain. This is kind of the moment where I start putting my nerd cap on and I really start to lean into this metaphor that I know God gave me. It was this idea that when you look at mountains, of course, they're beautiful, they're regal, but when you look at the top, it does not look fun to live up there. I mean, it's a really noble thing if you can climb all the way up there, but it doesn't seem pleasant. There's no life up there. There's barely any animals or bugs that live up there, much less a human. And so I really started to really kind of follow actual mountain climbers. If this is kind of a mountain that we climb with our pursuits and our ministries and our career paths and our family building, all these things, this adult that we're trying to create, if it is kind of a mountain for us, then maybe we should consult the people that make a living off climbing mountains. And so I really started to look into straight up mountain climbers, people that lived to do this, people that just loved to be on the peaks, in the summit, in the cold, in the snow. They just loved it. And they devoted and invested so much into that pursuit. I felt like there were so many similarities between them and how they go about it and me on my best days, how I would go about it. There's a level of preparation. There's a level of Humility. I think that for a lot of us mountain climbers, we're like, yeah, I'm about to get on that mountain. Watch this. And that's not how mountain climbers operate. They know that it is not safe up there. They know that there's not a lot of life up there. They know that at any moment, if they make a mistake, or their head is not right, or their mind isn't right, this could be it. And so the way they approach it is so different. And I think that we have glorified being on top. We've glorified the mountains. We've glorified all the awards, and we've glorified being the CEO and the boss and the king and the queen. We've glorified it so much that we haven't also been honest about the reason why so many people die up there. We watch the celebrities, we watch the pastors, we watch the artists, we watch them lose it, we watch the CEOs have terrible personal lives, we watch all this happen, we see it on TMZ, we see it in the tabloids, but we never stop to think that maybe it's not just them, maybe it's not just them having such bad or low character. Perhaps the environment that they have been pursuing and living in, perhaps it's not very livable. I just think we ought to be honest about the mountain, because the mountain itself, it never actually lied. It's rugged, it's cold, the air is thin, and there's always this fear that you could fall off. If that loneliness, that fear, that coldness, if you know that's not what God has called you to for your whole life, maybe for a day, maybe for a few hours in the day, maybe even for a slight season, but if you know that that's not where he wants you to be forever, that means there must be another place for us to actually live, and the mountain is not it. By the way, I get really kind of vulnerable with me and how I was dying on that mountain. I mean, like, making bad mistakes, sinning on this mountain. I've had people, honestly, this part of the book, like, this is as far as I had gotten for a long time. And so when I let other people read it, this is all they could really read. And the tears and the reactions that came from just being able to see themselves or see me on that ledge, way too high in the sky, not knowing what to do, when my help was going to come, and where it was going to come from. It's been so intense. And so if you can make it without crying or tearing up just a little bit, let me know, because you're part of a minority. Now, when I get to chapter 3, Discover the Valley. This is one of those places that I didn't quite feel qualified to write about until the season changed. I mean, I knew that there was an ideal place where there would be joy, there would be a certain level of peace, there would be a place where I didn't have to worry so much, be so concerned with so much. One thing I've always said, even to my friends, that I have a lot to consider all the time. There's just always a lot to consider. There were fans to consider, of course, the music, the business, but there's also a staff to consider, and then there's family to consider, their feelings, friends to consider, their feelings, money to consider, health to consider. A lot of us as adults, we just grow up with a lot of things to consider. It reminds me of when Jesus was talking to Martha. He was trying to talk to Mary and Martha, and Mary sat down to listen to him. Martha, however, is all over the place, cleaning up and doing other things, and even getting kind of annoyed that Mary wasn't helping. And Jesus, just like, he said something that to me sounded so petty. That's just the way I read it. That's not the way he said it, I'm sure. The way I read it was, Martha, you're worried about a lot of things. That's really kind of what he said. Martha, you are worried about a lot of things. You consider a lot of things. There's a lot of concerns that you have. Do you ever have a moment where you just don't? And that you consider me and you consider maybe who we are, who I am to you, and who you are to me. So I had this place that theoretically I knew that there had to be a better place for this. People can't live up here on this mountain. There must be this valley. And so as my winter turned into spring, I really started to get glimpses of these valley moments. I even got a valley starter kit that you'll read about from my cousin for Christmas. And it was just a place to not be such a boss, not be such a king, not be such a guy on top, this leader, this chief, this planner, this executor, this visionary, this blah 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 blah, multi-hyphenate, living up to your Instagram bio. For a moment, could you just be a child of God? And in this valley, just like the mountain is a mindset that we have to work, we have to pursue, the valley is a mindset that we have to pursue. And it's one that is very much rooted in just being a son or daughter of God. Like, yeah, I understand that you have things to consider. You have maybe kids and a business and money to consider. And if you're anything like me, as I'm getting older, you got health to consider more and more and more every day. But perhaps there is a place you can go where all that consideration isn't needed. And perhaps maybe you just focus on the one who's always considering you. That valley is what I started to discover. And in chapter 3, hopefully you can begin to discover it too. It is the equalizer. It is the balancer. It is sometimes the place that we're all missing as we do things even for God and with his name all over it. We call it gospel. We call it a church. We call it a ministry. We call it a charity organization. We call it a move of God. And still, sometimes the leader of those movements has forgotten that they are still, on their best day, a son, daughter of God. On their worst day, a son, a daughter of God. And in the valley, this mindset of being in the valley, we can actually live out that beautiful title, that first title, the title that we were born again with. Just a child of God. I wrote a song a long time ago. Adulting just made me rethink when he told me to come as a child. Maybe that was meant to save me. And so, like, I know that we kind of shun the child away the same way the disciples did when the kids ran up to Jesus. But perhaps when we do that to ourselves and we shoo the child away in us, we don't give ourselves a chance to refuel, recenter, recalibrate, and remember that the world does not revolve around us and the things that we do. It revolves around essentially who God is and what he did. Discover the valley. So in chapter 4, I really start to investigate this idea of being a son or daughter. Like, this was a really tough chapter for me to get through just emotionally because, you know, I didn't always have the best relationship with my dad. And by best, I don't mean that it was ever beef. It was never like negative. It just was sometimes just not present. It was never really robust. It was never incredibly beneficial to me. It first of all came late in my life, but also it just never developed into this place where I felt like I would get things from him. I would have a certain worth or value or lesson or understanding or status because he was my dad. Well, because of that lack of experience on earth, being a son. And I mean, quite to be quite honest with you, my mother's amazing. But even growing up, amongst a lot of women in the hood, I made the choice at a very young age to grow up fast. I was the kid who made his own business cards and made some fake credit cards and carried around cash in a wallet that my mother didn't even know I had. And, really just tried to grow up. I had a briefcase half the time, you know what I'm saying? Just stuff like that. I chose not to be a child for long. And so because of that, I really didn't have much experience being a son. And that is really difficult because the essence of your relationship with God is with Him as Father and you as son or daughter. So everything comes through there. I mean, a lot of times we experience God as somebody who enlarges our territory, somebody who manages our career, or even starts our career. But a lot of us have missed out on the most important and basic element of that relationship. And that is just being a son, being a daughter, understanding that you can't run all this, understand that you can't handle all this, understand that there is somebody that is ultimately providing for you because you became a provider and a protector so early in your life, and you are defined by it, and your kids expect it, and your staff expects it, and your wife or your husband expect it. It's hard for you to imagine that you're still not the ultimate provider. You're still not the ultimate protector. And once you put your cape up, there is something even more super, a hero that's even more super that has been taking care of you. There's a status, there's a peace, there's a power that you can't earn. No amount of degrees or awards or books you read will ever get you there, because honestly, you already got it. It's just that you don't necessarily believe in it. You don't take time to flesh it out and understand what that really means for your life and how to apply it. You don't spend enough time in the valley to know all the incredible benefits that come with being a son or daughter of God. And so in this chapter, I really get into it. I mean, I had this moment, I'm just going to say this. I had this moment. I was writing this chapter on the train, on the Amtrak train. I was going in between DC and New York. I can't remember which direction I was going. And it had opened me up so much and maybe angered and frustrated me. I think, and I didn't realize it, but it kind of jacked me up just trying to write this and get the story out, that when I got off the train, there was a lady, a conductor, and if you're listening, I'm very sorry, she said, "Hey, ain't you Jonathan McReynolds?" or something like that. It happens all the time. It happens daily. But for some reason, I was so worked up that I probably just screamed, "Yeah, I mean, what do you want now?" I don't know what I said, but I just know that I was so and she was so excited. I'm hoping that it didn't even register. But I just remember the effect that writing this chapter, digging into some of the details had on me. And even when I showed this chapter to my mother, she kind of cried and was taken aback because she didn't realize how much each of these moments and steps and lessons and conversations affected me. And so I can't wait for you guys to read it. And I just want forgiveness from that conductor lady on the Amtrak train. I was just going through something in that moment. I was writing chapter 4. I'm sorry. But that brings us to chapter 5. This is where now the work starts. So now we know what the mountain is. We know what the valley is. We know what the essence of the valley is. How do we get down there? And for me, it first started with stop climbing. And I know that's a crazy thought. We don't even realize we're climbing all the time. We don't even realize that, the first thought we have is what to post and what to write and what to create, and this meeting, and did I miss it, and what about this thing on my calendar, and man, I need to find another assistant. Whatever it is, like, we don't even realize that all day sometimes we are consumed with the climb. And the first thing that we have to do is bring a sacrifice of pause. Now, I wrote this. I remember there's a song, and I'm probably gonna sing it wrong, but it's like, we bring sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. Something like that. I might have gotten that all of it. I was pretty young. I don't even know where I got this from. I don't know if I heard it on TV or on the radio or if they sang it at church. I don't know. But that's the first thing I thought about when I thought of a sacrifice of pause. Because first of all, when I first heard a sacrifice of praise, I was like, what does that even mean? What do you mean? All we gotta do is say hallelujah. It's no big deal. Well, how's that a sacrifice? And I think that sometimes, well, first of all, there's a idea of it being a sacrifice because of what it does and what it gives to the Lord. Obviously, we have been in other eras of this, of humanity, where sacrifices were different. Sacrifices were your calf and your bird and your cattle and whatever else. We also even understand how we sacrifice with our money. So, I mean, like, there's a certain level of, this is part of our worship, to sacrifice this, to give this over. And it might be tough for you, it might take something out of you, but God is worth it. And I think that for a climber like me, and probably you, who we're so used to climbing, we're so used to putting the pedal to the metal, it's kind of awkward and really a sacrifice for us to stop. I mean, at any moment, just to stop. Like, just leave the Zoom. Just, stop planning something. Just leave the kids at grandma's house. Just stop. Just for 1 second, just take a pause so that you could think about something and someone a little bit larger and more important than your particular pursuit, your particular career path, your particular ministry, your ambitions, your goals, and your dreams. So I kind of jump back into the story. This moment, obviously, I'm opening for this tour, and it's amazing, but I'm dying up there, and I still try to keep it going. I still try to hold up relationships. I try to hold up health. I try to hold up career. I try to hold up staff and mom and sister and niece and nephew and all this other stuff. But at some point, I hit a brick wall. And now I have to figure out, what am I going to do before I really wreck this thing? Now, nobody saw me hit this brick wall but a few other people. But to me, the next step is everybody seeing it. Like, it being clear, like it being viral, it being crazy, it being noticeable to everybody. And I'm now just not crumbling myself, but I'm watching everything I've built crumble under my sin, under my stress, under my nerves, under my temper tantrums, whatever it is. I have to sacrifice all of the progress that I might have made, all of the things that I plan to produce, and pause. Stop. So you can truly evaluate what the mountain has done to you and begin to pivot downward towards the valley where God's benefits are waiting for you. That's chapter 5. So once we get to like chapter 6, now I feel like, I guess that was when I really started to feel like God was like just giving me the wind, giving me the understanding of this thing. Like, this is what it takes for you boss, you king, you queen, you chief, you CEO, you CTO, you COO, you worker, you mom, you dad. Like, this is what it takes now because we have so much to consider. We have so much that we carry. We now look at our hands and we realize, man, those rocks really jacked up my hands. And we look at our lungs and we're like, man, living in that thin air all this time has really done some damage here. We look at our arms and they're worn out and our backs are tired and achy. Now, this is what you do to come down. Now, I know it's scary because you still have bills to pay and you still have to deal with some responsibilities. But remember, just as climbing the mountain is a mindset, the valley is a mindset, coming down from the mountain to the valley is all about changing your mind, even about stuff that you still have to accomplish. For me, it was like breathing out my stuff, my goals, my pressures, my concerns, and breathing in God's. Breathing in his, like an understanding of him. So breathing out, man, I got to do that. I got to do that. I always do that. And, I'm scared of this happening. So I better work 3 times harder because I don't want that to happen. I don't want those people to pass me up. And I don't want them to look at me as if I'm behind or this, blah, blah, blah. I got to breathe that out. I have to exhale that. All of that carbon dioxide, I got to get that out of me. I can't live off that. The plants can. I can't live off of that. I have to breathe that out and breathe in the oxygen of who God is, what he's done, and who I am in him. And each time I did that exhalation, inhalation, exhalation, inhalation, it really, it put me in a place where I was no longer the main character. I was no longer the one that had to have it all figured out. I'm no longer the one who has to be hyper concerned about all of these things all of the time, because I'm realizing somebody else has really been pulling the strings. As a matter of fact, if I go back to the beginning, he's the one that started all of this anyway. So if he was able to start it from nothing, if he was able to kick all of this off on nothing, from nothing, then surely now that there is something there, he can handle that too. And some of the ego and some of the concern and the worry and the pressure, that was just me. And I have to get rid of that. I have to, or else I'll stay on the mountain forever. Because ego does not want me to come down. Ego wants to be able to look down at everything I left and look up at what else I need to do. But that's not how God wants us to be. He wants us to be his kids all the time. So that when there is something for us to do, he knows he can just call on his son or daughter. He doesn't have to go through our assistant or receptionist. Ooh, that was a bar. Hey, yo, that was a bar. That was a bar. That was a bar. I wish I put it in the book. I didn't, but you got it free here. God wants to call his son or daughter, not their assistant or receptionist. That's going to hit you later. Chapter 7, take in the view. So as I was kind of in this phase where now I'm kind of thinking about this metaphor, and I'm thinking about, it started off as just a seed. Now there's an opportunity to write a book about it, and I'm living it right now in the moment, which, by the way, is very normal for me. Every album that you ever heard from me, I'm praying these prayers right then. I haven't mastered it. I haven't conquered it. I'm praying those prayers right then, and then recording both my question and often God's answer. And so in this kind of approach to writing, I'm now starting to be like attuned to everything that God has to say concerning this. I think that's the beauty of the way I've been writing, is because when I say writing, I mean music and even this book, is that when I turn my frequency on to a particular thing and I start looking for God in those places, he's everywhere. Like he seriously has his fingerprint and a concept and a part of him in everything. So when I kind of came down from this mountain and I found myself in a place where I didn't care as much, I started to see a lot of cool concepts. And I think one of my favorite concepts is this idea of goodness versus greatness. And this idea that since I was a kid, and I was kind of a nerdy kid, I was a, pretty, advanced kid when it came to academics and just the way I think. I have always felt like greatness was my birthright. Like, and it was my number one pursuit. Hey, whatever happens, don't you dare be mediocre. Don't you dare just be very good. You need to be great. You need to be amazing. You need to be excellent. You need to be above reproach. But then when you start looking in the Bible for kind of this special section for greatness, like things that he's only going to tell great people, things that only pertain to the principals and the C-level executives, the things that only pertain to you after you've won a Grammy or something, the things that only pertain to you after you get to 1 million followers. I looked for that section in the Bible and I couldn't find it. What I did find when it came to how to live and how to interact with people and how to interact with God, I saw a lot of stuff about goodness. Like, I didn't see a whole lot about being great in this world and rising to the top of everything and being number one. I didn't see a whole bunch of, making, Forbes, top 100 list. I don't see those things. What I do see is meekness and temperance and patience and goodness. I see long suffering and I see goodness. It seems as though greatness is not as big of a deal to him as it is to us. Like the type of greatness that we talk about, the type of greatness that gets you statues somewhere. It seems as if what he called us to was goodness, and sometimes what we do, what we give up, what we compromise on, what we add to our climb in pursuit of greatness absolutely goes against the whole point of what he was calling us to. He might be calling us to do some great things, but some of the greatness that defines, you go to Egypt and you see all of these obelisks and you see all these statues and you realize that from the moment they became king, they were building monuments to their greatness. And we might say, man, that's crazy. That's a big pursuit. And that's crazy how many people had to go along with it. But we do the same thing. From the moment we start this mountain, we start trying to figure out how can we build a monument to greatness. And that a lot of times goes in complete contradiction to the virtues that God called us to. So once you finally come down off that mountain and you just exist in the valley as God's son or daughter for a second, you realize that some of the things you sought after, some of the things that you invested, man, that's not even what God was asking for. Take in the view. You might learn something in the valley. Chapter 8, Plan a Better Way Up. So this is one of my favorite places, one of my favorite chapters, because there's kind of no point in me talking about the, coming down from the mountain into this valley. If there's no point in me talking about it if I act as if the valley is going to be where I stay and you stay forever. No. Let's not lie to ourselves. We can go down and be son or daughter in this moment. We can take in the view, But at some point, you're going to be called back up again. At some point, you're going to have to go back and clock in. At some point, you're going to have to go back, be dad. You're going to go back, be mom, be the boss. You're going to have to go back to that mission, that grind. You're going to have to go back and get into the studio. You're going to have to figure out the next book you're going to write, the next whatever. You're going to get back on the mountain. Some of life is absolutely done on the mountain. But now that we know what the mountain is, what to expect up there, how lifeless it is, how cold it is, how lonely it is, how we lack intimacy up there. And now we also know what the valley is and what it brings to us, and how even on our worst days, we're still accepted as children of God. So now that we know these things, we can be smart about how we go back up this mountain. Well, now we can be wise about, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that too much, because that's when it gets kind of hard and stressful. Maybe I need to like kind of mark this trail so I know how to get back down. Or maybe this is the most important thing. While I'm in the valley, let me make sure that I know who I am. Let me make sure that before I get on this mountain, I don't get up there as some kid trying his best to impress the teachers again. Let me, before I get back up there, let me not be the guy that's just trying to escape mediocrity so people don't say anything. Let me try not to be the guy that is so heavily vested in the opinions of people that as long as they're yelling, I keep climbing. And when they stop yelling, I get worried that they're not applauding anymore. And I keep climbing higher to see if that impresses them and restarts the applause. Let me not do that. Let me do something different. Let me consume and ingest and really absorb all of these lessons, all of this identity, all of this joy set before me that God has given me in the valley, so I can be smarter, more equipped, better fed, and then not tethered to the mountain when I get back in those tough altitudes. This is one of my favorite chapters, because the truth is we're going to have to climb again. Maybe Monday, we're going to have to climb again. Maybe when the kids get home, we're going to have to climb again. But now we can approach it differently and better prepared, better stocked, because of what we learned in the valley. And finally, we get to kind of the first close. You know, in black church, sometimes the preacher closes one or two times. You think he's done, but he's not. But this is kind of the first close. Stay anchored to the valley. If you could master this, and you could change your mind so much that you see yourself as primarily or as first a son or daughter of God, and if all of this doesn't work, and if you get fired and or the company crumbles or nobody listens to this song, that still you are firmly a son or daughter of God. You have a solid and guaranteed residence in the valley. If you can get that mindset and stay anchored to that, even as work picks up again, even as life presents more things for you to consider again, that changes the game for your stress level. It changes the game for your peace level. It changes the way you can approach things confidently, knowing that this is important, but it won't make or break me. The only thing that makes or breaks me is how God feels about it and me. And we already know how sealed my status is with him. So I can approach this with confidence, because I know that if this is for me, I'm one of God's kids. He's going to make this thing happen. But also, if this doesn't happen, I'm one of God's kids. I'll be okay. And so when you can stay anchored to this valley mindset, even as you have to spend half of the day or spend the work week or spend a season, really going up that tough, crazy mountain, I just think that it changes the whole game for our nervous system. It changes the whole game for our souls when we know who owns us. Like, who's the Lord? Who's the King? Who's the Father? It's not us. Even if somebody else calls us Father or King or Lord, landlord, you never know. My point is, even then, there's somebody greater, which makes us not quite as responsible for every single thing that happens. The race is not even always given to the fastest runner, and the battle's not even always given to the strongest person. But time and chance happens to them all. Like, there's a level of, I don't have control over this thing. I could do the best I could do, but I almost have to be disconnected from the results, because what comes out might not necessarily be exactly what I wanted or expected. But even then, if things are underwhelming or overwhelming, I have a God in the valley that will embrace me as a son or daughter that he's just simply proud of. We have to stay anchored in the valley. Even in this moment, working on this for you, I have to remind myself that if you don't like it, or I'm too long-winded, so the publisher doesn't like it, I'm okay. Because I don't live on the mountain. I don't live here in front of these cameras. I'm anchored to the valley. And then finally, my real close, my second close, is called The Headliner. And I just really loved how this journey in the book began with me being an opener, which has its own level of stress and pressures, but then it ends with me being one of the principal acts. It ends with me being a headliner. It ends with me having more pressure. It ends with me being in places where I'm the focal point for a second. Oh, snap. It's all about me. People are waiting for me to do something. And I know that you have had experiences like that, where the kids are waiting on you. The staff is waiting on you. Like, even the boss, they're all at this table waiting on your presentation. This is a moment where I realized I'm a little different. That I actually have less stress right now, even though I am a very main character, than I did when I wasn't one of the main characters. And that means that it has nothing to do with actual success. It has nothing to do with actual external conditions. It's really just all about you. It's all about you having a different mindset that's not so beholden to the mountain and your accomplishments and your goals and your dreams and your ambitions, and actually being anchored in a valley where it's all about God's goals for you and ambitions and the strength that he's going to give you to carry out all that stuff. In The Headliner, I had a moment where I realized the only reason why I'm handling this better is because I'm getting on stage every night a little more sure of who I am in God. This book was absolute labor of love for me. And I'm so excited to share it with you, because I do think that we have romanticized the mountain way too much. We act like being big, being popular, being rich is the end all be all. It's not. And you can ask almost everybody that lives on top of the hill that the true joy they got was not connected to the grind. It was connected to how well they could find love, joy, peace outside of the grind. And with God, we just have a cheat code, because we know the fruit of the Spirit and the originator of all of those beautiful things. So I encourage you that before you climb any higher, Give God a sacrifice of pause. And make sure that you can become acquainted with the valley. Thank you.